Lord, I thank you very much for the opportunity to stand here and to teach a bit more about your word. I ask that you help me to speak truth into the truth that you are showing, to help me to help these people learn a bit more about you, and to help me speak clearly, and yeah. I thank you for all that you've done and all that you will do. And in your name, amen. All right. So does anybody happen to know what day today is, other than the 24th of May? Sunday. Yes, it's Sunday, of course. That is true. Does anybody happen to know what holiday it is today, I should say? It's Kvitusyndagar, a.k.a. Pentecost. Now, most preachers or teachers or whatever on the day of Pentecost talk about, oddly enough, they talk about Pentecost. However, I technically kind of will, but like 4 steps removed. So Pentecost was, are you guys familiar with Passover? Yes. Pentecost was essentially just Passover number 2, that occasionally on the first Passover, people had done something like they had to bury somebody or something else, in which case they were considered unclean, and they weren't allowed to take part in the first Passover. And this was kind of a problem because God told them to take part. And so back when the Passover was first started to be a thing, God had commanded his people, if you can't take part in the first, wait for a few weeks, for 49 weeks, and then start that on the 50th, and then do the Passover basically again that time. And that's the end of that second Passover week is what we call Pentecost. Now, I have been teaching, this is going to sound like a complete change of topic, but it's not. I have been teaching my class in Icelandic Sunnudagaskola, Sunday school. I have been teaching them a series on laws, the laws that God gave. Now, recently, I've not gotten very far. I started with the first law: don't eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and then I went through the 10 Commandments. Now, the first 2 of the 10 Commandments, can anybody tell me what they are? Anybody tell me what the first 2 are? William, do you know what the first one is? Very similar to the first one, but not quite. No idols, yes. Don't have any gods other than God, and don't make anything to worship, like statues or whatever. So don't worship anything, like anything that's not physical, and don't worship anything that is physical, as long as it's not God. Anybody have any clue how I'm going to connect the Pentecost and don't have any gods? I didn't think anybody would. So why was the Passover a thing? Why was the Passover a holiday for the people of Israel? What was it celebrating? The Exodus, the leaving from Egypt. Now, I don't think most of you would connect what I'm about to say with the laws, but why was Pharaoh why did he eventually let the people go? The 10 plagues. Now, did you know that those 10 plagues were specific plagues? Not just things to make the people feel bad, to make him let them go, which, that was part of it, but mostly the reason that those 10 things, why did he choose hail, fiery hail, and a swarm of locusts instead of, like he did later in the Bible, opening up the earth? Why did he choose those 10? Anybody, you want to? It was their gods. The Egyptians, like many cultures, like the Norse and the Greeks, they had this pantheon of gods, this group of gods that were not actually gods, but they believed in them, and each god had a certain area that they were in charge of. For example, there is Osiris. And it was believed that Osiris was in charge of keeping Egypt healthy and that the Nile was his bloodstream. Do you remember what the first plague was? Turning the Nile to blood. Very interesting. Now, there were several other Egyptian gods that had to do with water. Now, I do not speak Egyptian, neither current nor old, so some of these names are going to sound odd, probably because A, they're not our language, B, I don't know how to pronounce them. So I'm just going to do my best. There was Hapi, Hapi, who was the official water bearer, which was a job for the gods. And then Khnum, I can't pronounce it, the guardian of rivers, the guardian of the source of the Nile. So when God was sending these plagues, it was not just, I want to make people miserable so they'll do what I say. Because that is what a lot of people think that the God of the Old Testament was. Like, if you don't do what I say, I shall punish you. And don't get me wrong, there is punishment if you disobey God. But that wasn't the point. The point was, I am stronger than your gods. Your gods are nothing compared to me. Your gods, you believe they have all power over a single thing. I overpower them in that area, and I do it to all of your gods. The side effect was people were miserable and there were lots of death. It was a side effect, not the main goal. Most people miss that when they're talking about so many times in the Bible, when God, especially the Old Testament, when God says these people need to die, they just believe God wants them dead, which is where the whole idea of the Old Testament God being mean or grumpy, and the New Testament God being, full of love. There is no difference. Jesus, when he came, yes, he was full of love. Yes, he healed the sick. He healed the lame. He rose the dead. Yes, he did that. But he also said, ye vipers, how shall ye escape the damnation of hell? He went into church and flipped tables and used a whip to attack the priests, okay? It's the same God. It's the same thing that makes him angry. They were, the priests and the Sadducees and the Levites, they were focusing on the tradition. They were worshiping the tradition. They were worshiping the money, really, for a lot of them. They were selling services that should have been free. They were selling lame animals for sacrifices that should have been a personal cost for the person instead of just buy. Now, there was supposed to be, you can buy an animal if you have to travel a really long way and the animal's probably going to die, but they were taking that and twisting it. And it's the same thing that the people in Egypt were doing. Plague number 2, frogs. There was a goddess that they worshipped named Heket, something like that. She was supposed to be the goddess of fertility and childbirth. And a lot of the Egyptian gods, I don't know why they decided that they wanted their gods to have animal heads, but they did. I don't really understand how a lot of these false gods came to be because they make no sense. But this goddess had a frog head. And so The symbol of the goddess of life was used to choke out life. And an interesting part here, it's one of the only plagues that we get, that we are told specifically that the frogs, they did not disappear. They just died and piled up in piles. A direct insult to their goddess of life. The third one was gnats or lice that were made from the dust of the earth. They worshipped the god Geb, who was the god of the earth and giver of crops. And God directly turned the influence of this false god Geb, and he turned it into a pestilence, a plague. Flies and swarms, an insult directly of the false god Khepri, of creation, the movement of the sun, specifically in the morning, and rebirth, and whose head was that of a beetle. And God sent a plague of flies or beetles or other such things. For livestock, there were two main gods that this was against. Hathor, which was supposed to be love, protection, and motherhood, but if you actually look in how they worshipped this god, would not like it. Also, it's not the real god. It's just a statue who had the head of a cow. And her yes. Why you think that the symbol of motherhood should have a cow's head, I do not know. But that's what they decided. And then also Apis, which was their sacred bull god of fertility and strength. And God sent a plague on their livestock, their cattle. Cows, sheep, all that other stuff. Cows were the biggest one because that was food and labor all in one. The boils and sores, they had a couple different gods of healing. Isis, Sekhmet, and Imhotep of healing, medicine, that kind of stuff. And God said, try to fix this. Now, the first couple plagues, the magicians of Egypt were able to copy. I think it was the first 2 or 3. Some people like to think that magic, they talk about magic and just, like stories or whatever. And you can use whatever you want in your stories, but there is a type of magic, I use that with quotations, that is real. And I don't mean like waving a stick and saying funny words. God, obviously, does a lot of things. He does many miracles. But he's not the only one who has power. And some people, these magicians specifically that are talked about here, they believed that their power came from their gods. But it did not come from their gods. It came from he who is the enemy of God. Now, he's not as blatant today in that, but he's still around and he still does give his people some powers. Mostly it's just a very, what we call a silver tongue. He's very good with charisma. He likes to pretend that he is teaching truth, but that's not what we're mainly talking about today. So this one I found hilarious. The fiery hail was again. There were two main goddesses that this was against. The first was Shu. Yes, Shu. Like Shu. The goddess of the atmosphere, or the sky, or the heavens. And then Nut, the goddess of the sky. Yes, there was Shu and Nut. I'm fairly certain I'm pronouncing that wrong, but that's what it's spelled like. So, yeah. Locusts was against the goddess Rennetet, something like that, who was of harvest and crops, and Seth, who was chaos and destructive storms. The 3 days of darkness was specifically against their chief god, their biggest one, like Zeus or Odin from the Norse or Greek pantheons, Ra, god of the sun. And God blocked him out for 3 days. So dark you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face, except for his children were. And then the last one, the firstborn, the death of the firstborn. The people, the Egyptians were a little odd for this specific reason. They believed that their king was actually a god, which is why they would follow him so fervently. They believed he was the son of Ra. How they think that worked, I don't know. You really have to twist your mind to fit that into, especially with the whole, has an actual son, and then the son himself becomes the son of Ra. I don't get it. My point here with that specifically is God saw the Egyptian gods, and instead of at Pharaoh, when he sent Moses and Moses got Aaron to say, "Let my people go," God knew Pharaoh would ignore him, would harden his heart. And instead of sending just any random attack, he sent plagues that would hit at the heart, not just of Pharaoh, but of all of Egypt, that would twist the knife specifically against the gods that they believed in, that they trusted in. They put all their faith in these gods. And God showed up and basically said, "You're worshiping a rock that somebody carved to have a cow head. That's dumb. I have power. Let me show you. Let my people go." And eventually he did. Granted, I don't know why Pharaoh looked at all of that and decided that he wanted to take the Israelites back. Probably, in all honesty, he bought into the whole "I am an actual God" thing and thought he had power that the rest of the plagues didn't, which doesn't make any sense at all. But religious dogma like that doesn't always make sense. In fact, it rarely does. For those of you who want the reference, Exodus 11 through 13 is where the 10 plagues happen. You don't need to turn there, but that's where it happens. And I would definitely recommend you read this on your own. And now the thing about the Bible and God, he didn't point this out. He didn't say, "I am turning the river to blood specifically to bother," what was it? Who was it again? Osiris. Or to point out that this God is not a God. He didn't say that. He just said, "I'm turning the river to blood." He just said, "Moses, turn the river to blood." And he did. The Bible doesn't point out any of these. It doesn't even mention any of these gods by name. In fact, it barely mentions that there's gods that are talking about at all. I can't even recall off the top of my head if it mentions these are against gods. You have to actually go, at least not in this specific. I think it talks about it later, that it talks about how he was against the gods of Egypt. But in these couple verses, it really doesn't even mention them. You have to actually go back and look at who were the Egyptian gods that they worshipped at that time, which they are no longer worshipped. Interesting fact there. And to figure out, why did this matter to the people? I mean, besides the fact that it was really unpleasant to live in that time. God had not written down the 10 Commandments yet. But we can be pretty certain that he had told everyone about those rules. Don't murder. If God had not said don't murder, if he had not mentioned that murder was bad, why did Cain get punished? If he did not mention, there's so many different things. Don't steal. Why was stealing thought about in such a bad light? God had already said these rules, and we can be pretty certain that Egypt, at the very least, knew some of them, or at least they should have. Do you remember why Israel was in Egypt at all? There was a fellow who had a coat of many colors. Yeah, he was sold into slavery and then became the Pharaoh's right-hand man. You think he didn't tell the Pharaoh the rules of the God that he served, the God that sent him the dreams to rescue? Like, he specifically said, I can't help, but my God can. You think Pharaoh wasn't interested about this God who was able to rescue his people from 7 years of famine? You think he wasn't interested? He didn't want to know, at the very least, the superstitious, hey, there's a God who did something really big, I don't want to offend him. What are his rules? Even if he didn't worship the God himself, it would make sense. This God just did something big. How do I not make him mad? And now, granted, it was several hundred years after, so they probably lost a lot of that. But you can't tell me they didn't have at least somewhere in there that these Israelites have a God, here's his rules. The Egyptians were known, they were known for keeping track of stuff like that. They had very detailed worship traditions and whatnot for all of their false gods. When God sends a punishment, it is never just because I said so. There are, for example, there are times God will say, do this because I said so, but it's never the only point. There's always a reason behind it. I'm going to use my dad as an example. My dad, occasionally, I would ask him something or why I can't do something, and he'd say, because I said so. I will tell you this, that was pretty rare. And do you know when it happened? When we were out and about and Dad didn't have time to explain himself. Dad always, when he had the time, told me, this is a rule I am making, and here is why. Now, he might not have told me here is why at the time. He would have waited. Sometimes he just said, because I said so. We had to go home, and then he'd be like, okay, we didn't have time. I was busy. Here's why I said that. Not everybody does that, but I'm using him as an example. Now, Dad is human, and so there are occasionally times where his reasoning, I look at it and I'm like, I can understand where you're coming from. I might not fully agree with this one specific thing, but I can definitely live with that. I can follow those rules. That's not a problem. God, that's not a thing. If God says, I said something, here's why, does it really matter what we think? Who knows better? Who knows what's better for you? You or God? Okay, God knows what's better for you. Now, that in and of itself doesn't necessarily mean we should follow him. So here's the question. Who loves you more? Your mom, your dad, your spouse, or God? God. That is why we should follow him. Those two things don't always work together. Somebody can love you very much and give you very bad advice. I've met quite a few people who've done that, or they followed advice that was not good at all because their parents said, this is what you should do, and they regretted it. Their parents loved them. They just had really bad advice. And then there's the other way around. People who know exactly what's good for you, but aren't really interested in you. God is both. He knows what's best for you. Not just he's wise, which he obviously is, he sees the future. He sees if you do this, this bad thing will happen, or this good thing will happen. You should pick the good thing. And he loves you enough to tell you that, or to gently prod, or not so gently prod if you go too far, when you're going the wrong way. Eventually, he'll start with gentle corrections. But the farther along the wrong way you go, the worse the corrections get. And eventually, he starts sending your own version of the 10 plagues. The Israelites, they were supposed to worship God. I say supposed to, not they did. Many of them did, don't get me wrong. There were many who did, but there were also many who had in their hearts the Egyptians were their owners. They were slaves. They had no choice. And so there were probably quite a few who looked at that and said, if our God is real, why are they in charge? And I can guarantee you, there were quite a few Israelites who, maybe not openly, but at least partially, followed some of the laws of the gods of Egypt. This God does not enjoy harming people. He will do it if it is necessary, but he loves everyone, and hurting them is deeply unpleasant. So he would only do this if it was needed, not just to get his people out, but also to show the Egyptians, and more importantly, the Israelites, that he was the God. There is no other God beside me, he said. Thou shalt not worship any other God, any other idol. The rest of the 10 Commandments definitely are important. But the first two, I am God, don't pretend something else is. Hey, William, would you like to come and play video games with me tomorrow? Excellent. How excellent. Okay, here. You and pretend I have a video game switch. Here, let's play together. Does that make any sense at all? William is looking at me and laughing, obviously because I'm not actually being serious. Imagine if I was and legitimately thought that this box was William. Would he still be laughing? No, he'd probably lock me in an asylum, because why do you think a box is your brother? How do you think God feels when he sees people doing that, looking at a box and being like, thou art God, and thou shalt bring me joy and peace and health? It's a box of tissues, or it's a rock. It is literally a rock. Yes, someone carved it to be fancy. It's still a rock. Or even worse, it's not there. There is nothing. You are just praying to an imaginary box, to an imaginary rock. Why? And so God, now, if it was just something that was for you specifically and it was harming you, now God would try to send corrections, try to help you, try to do the metaphysical equivalent of put you in an asylum until you were better. But it's not just that. People, when they worship those falseness, they're not just worshiping a rock. They are, that is what they're doing, but in doing so, they're inviting in anything that happens to be listening. Sometimes it's just some guy who really wants money and is like, I shall tell you what this, what is it again? I shall tell you what Osiris desires if you give me money. Sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's the devil who's listening and he's like, they want instructions. Let me just give them some dumb ideas. Make them think it's from their rock. Do either of those sound good? No. especially the second one, because the devil likes to put in lots of stuff, like something that was very common in these days, infant sacrifice, which we can all agree is very bad. When God makes a rule, when God says, do this, don't do this, it's not just because he said so. Well, okay, technically, yes, it is because he is God. And therefore, if he says something, it is like, it just is. He said, let there be light because he said so. And then there was light. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about when he makes a rule for us. It's never just because he wants to make a rule. It's because it is better for you and for me to follow what he said. Because we can ignore what he said. We can. He's not gonna make us follow. It's just our life will be very unpleasant and probably short. All right. In closing, I would like to ask you a question that I don't really want an answer for. I just want you to think. What specifically has God sent a plague into your life? Now, I don't mean like giant swarms of locusts or frogs or whatever. He doesn't really do that anymore, but he will send something into your life that is highly unpleasant. Now, there's the whole thing like with Job where it's the devil or something else testing you, and God allows him to. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something that he sent into your life, and you know, I am doing this that is not right. I am doing this specific thing. And you know in your heart, I should not be doing this. I think we all have, at some point or another, maybe even now, have something like that in our hearts, that I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't have this in my life. And God has sent something into your life to prod you away from that. I don't want an answer. Because frankly, if somebody asked me this, I would not answer them. Because rude, you know? But I want you to think about it. Maybe he hasn't sent anything into your life yet. Maybe me standing here asking you is his equivalent of Moses saying, let my people go. Maybe. Granted, I'll be honest, I really hope that's not the case because I do not want to be in the same place as Moses was right then. Because I do not think I can, that is some very big shoes to fill. So I hope that's not the case. But maybe that's what God is trying to say. Maybe not. But at the very least, think about it. All right, let's close in prayer. Lord, thank you very much for the reminder of who you are. You are the lawgiver, but you are also the one who loves us. You love us enough to send a personalized plague, as it would be, in order to change our life for the better. You don't want to, but you're willing to. I thank you for being the God who loves us enough that you're willing to help us, even if we're not particularly happy about it. For loving us enough to be willing to help us on our way back. I also thank you for loving us enough, your people enough, that you are definitely willing to send plagues to those who would try to stop us from living your will. I thank you for all that you have done and will do. And in your name, amen. All right. We will see you back here at 11 o'clock. You may stand up and walk around and get coffee.
Obadiah took the prophets and he hid them in a cave. While the world around them needed God, they stayed silent, hid away. Then a man of God stood boldly. He'd never known that cave. He just stood out in the open and told old wicked Ahab, meet me on the mountain. Stay out on the mountain, stand up true and brave. Let them see Elijah's God, the one who sends the fire and rain. Stay out on the mountain, show the world God has not changed. Stay out on the mountain, don't go near the cave. The prophets had no worries, hiding safely in that cave. They could take a stand